I missed my birthday celebration, and at family dinner my dad blurted out, "Your actions broke our marriage." Everyone smiled, except me. I got up and left without saying anything, cutting off contact since. Now they're blowing up my phone, saying, "Hi everyone. I'm Mark, 38 years old, and I'm still trying to process everything that happened over the weekend." I honestly don't know where to begin or how to explain it without sounding like the bad guy in some twisted family drama. But here goes. I come from a family that, on the outside, looks like what you'd expect of a normal middle-class suburban family. My parents, Gerald and Linda, have been married for over 4 decades. They've raised 2 kids, me and my younger sister Rachel, who's 33 now. For years, I believed that beneath the surface there were cracks, but I never imagined those cracks would widen into something so deep and so personal that it would affect me in ways I never expected. Growing up, my relationship with my parents was complicated. My mom, Linda, was always the emotional center of the family. She's the kind of person who holds everyone together, sometimes at the expense of her own needs. My dad, Gerald, was more distant and, frankly, difficult to please. He was a successful businessman, but he always had high expectations, and he didn't show much warmth toward me or Rachel. If anything, he seemed to favor Rachel, the younger sister, and that always left me feeling a bit sidelined. Rachel was the kind of person who knew how to charm Dad with a smile and a quick joke. She often got away with things I wouldn't have dared. Our parents' marriage was rocky for years, but I mostly stayed out of it. I was the responsible one, so I just buried myself in work and tried to keep the peace. Now, fast forward to this year. My 38th birthday was approaching, and I was quietly dreading it. My marriage with Jenna had been under strain for several months. Between work stress and our own communication issues, I wasn't in the mood for a big celebration. I mentioned to my parents a few weeks before that I'd rather keep things low-key. Maybe just a small dinner with Jenna, no big party. They didn't seem thrilled but nodded. I figured that was that. But what I didn't realize was that my decision not to have a big birthday party was seen by them as a personal slight. I didn't want to offend anyone, but I just wasn't emotionally or mentally prepared for a big family gathering. On the day of my birthday, I stayed busy with work and avoided family calls. Jenna and I decided to grab dinner, just the two of us, later in the evening. Around 7 p.m., just as we were about to leave the house, my phone buzzed with a text from Rachel. "You're not coming tonight? Mom and Dad are waiting." I was confused and a bit annoyed. "Mom and Dad know I said no big party," I texted back. She replied, "It's not a party. It's just dinner. Please come." I hesitated but agreed. I wanted to make peace, after all. When I arrived, the house looked like a small gathering, but more than what I had expected. A few relatives I barely knew, some neighbors, and even Dad's business partner were there. Mom greeted me warmly, but looked a bit anxious. I thought maybe they wanted to surprise me with a quiet celebration after all. The dinner started with small talk, polite laughter, and polite smiles. Jenna was clearly uncomfortable. She knew the family dynamics well enough to feel the tension under the surface. Rachel was seated next to Dad, clearly the center of attention. I sat across from Mom, who tried her best to engage me in conversation. But then, midway through the meal, everything changed. Dad suddenly stood up, cleared his throat loudly, and looked straight at me. "Mark," he said, voice steady but with an edge I hadn't heard before, "your actions broke our marriage." The room went silent. The kind of silence where everyone is waiting to see what happens next. I blinked, stunned, trying to process what I just heard. Mom's smile faltered. Rachel's eyes lit up like she was finally getting the upper hand. I wanted to ask him what he meant. I wanted to explain myself, but the words caught in my throat. The people around the table started exchanging glances, some suppressing awkward smiles, some whispering quietly. It felt like I was being put on trial in front of an audience that had already decided the verdict. I kept thinking, what actions? What marriage? How do I break their marriage by not wanting a party or by choosing to live my life differently? I remembered the years of tension, the quiet arguments between my parents, the subtle way Dad always seemed more distant from me than from Rachel. Was this his way of blaming me for the years of unhappiness between them? Was I being made a scapegoat for things that had nothing to do with me? Mom looked at Dad with that sad, defeated expression that I've seen so many times before. She said nothing. Rachel smirked, clearly pleased. I didn't want to start a fight. I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of a big scene. So I stood up quietly, said nothing, grabbed my jacket, and walked out of the house. After that night, I spent the next day in a sort of daze. My phone was buzzing nonstop. Calls from Mom, texts from Rachel, and even a few from Dad himself, all with different tones. Mom's messages were tearful, filled with "We miss you," and "Please don't do this to us." Rachel's were sharper, like she was daring me to keep ignoring them. Dad's were the coldest, short, clipped, like a summons rather than a request. I decided to ignore them, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I needed space to think without their voices crowding my head. The thing is, the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how deep this had all gone. My parents' marriage wasn't just rocky. It was a battlefield, and somehow, I was caught in the crossfire as the enemy. I started recalling moments from childhood and adulthood, little things that now felt like puzzle pieces falling into place. How Dad would brush off my accomplishments, but light up when Rachel talked about her job or her social life. How Mom would call me late at night, upset after some fight Dad had had with Rachel or even with Mom herself, and she would unload her frustrations on me. It was always about how Gerald was impossible to please, how he expected perfection, how he blamed everyone but himself when things went wrong. And Rachel? She was always the golden girl, never really held accountable for much. It became clear that Dad's outburst during my birthday dinner wasn't a spontaneous thing. It was calculated. I believe it was meant to humiliate me, to paint me as the cause of their family's problems, to make me the villain in the story of their failing marriage. A few days later, I finally looked at some of the texts. One from Rachel said, "You're selfish. You always have been. Dad and Mom are falling apart because you can't be there for your family." Another from Mom said, "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us?" With silence. "Your father is heartbroken, Mark." And from Dad, a text that chilled me to the bone. "You will regret this. Family means everything, and you're destroying yours." The tone was shifting from hurt to threatening. I realized I was no longer just being ignored or pleaded with. They were trying to control me, using guilt, manipulation, and fear. Then came the calls. My phone would ring multiple times a day. When I didn't answer, they would leave voicemails, sometimes filled with tears, other times filled with icy calmness that made my skin crawl. One voicemail from Mom had her voice breaking as she said, "Mark, please come home. We can fix this. It's not too late." One from Dad was different. It was less emotional, more commanding. "We will talk when you're ready. You don't get to decide when. You owe this family your loyalty." Rachel left a message that was barely a whisper, "You're dead to us." I deleted most of them, but saved a few, because I wasn't sure if I wanted evidence of how toxic this had become. Through all of this, Jenna was my rock. She urged me to consider therapy, to try and mend bridges, but she also saw how toxic the family dynamic was. "Mark," she said one night as we sat quietly in the living room, "this isn't just about a missed birthday. They've been pushing you down for years. They're not just upset, they're trying to control you. You have to decide what's best for your own peace." Her words helped me see things more clearly, but the pain was still raw. I felt betrayed, not just by Dad's cruel words, but by the way Mom and Rachel seemed to side with him, turning against me like I was the villain in a story I didn't write. Then, about a week after the dinner, I got a knock on my door late one afternoon. When I opened it, it was my cousin, Linda. She's always been the neutral one in the family, more like a friend than a relative. She looked nervous but determined. "Mark, we need to talk," she said. "What's happening with your family? It's worse than you know." I invited her in. Over coffee, she told me things I never expected. Apparently, Dad had been spreading stories about me among the family and even business associates, painting me as irresponsible and ungrateful. He'd been manipulating Mom into believing that I was deliberately trying to tear the family apart, and Rachel was fully on his side, acting almost like his enforcer. Linda said, "You're not imagining it. They're gaslighting you, Mark. And it's getting worse." Hearing this was painful, but also clarifying. For years, I'd dismissed the signs as family quirks. Now I understood I was facing a deliberate campaign to isolate me. That night, after Linda left, I sat alone and realized something important. This wasn't just about a missed birthday or even their failing marriage. This was about control and power within the family. They wanted me to submit, to apologize for things I didn't do, to bend to their narrative. And I wasn't going to. But I also knew that standing my ground meant I was going to be fighting against all of them. The next day, I received an email from Dad's business partner congratulating Dad on keeping the family united, and hinting that the Mark situation was a shame but necessary for peace. After that unsettling email from Dad's business partner, I realized things were far more organized and sinister than I ever imagined. It wasn't just Dad lashing out at me in a moment of anger. This was a carefully orchestrated effort to isolate me, to shape the family narrative so that I looked like the one tearing everything apart. I took a deep breath and started thinking about how to handle it. But honestly, the more I tried to analyze it, the heavier the weight on my chest became. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. It was betrayal, on a scale I hadn't truly understood before. A few days later, I tried to reach out to Mom, not because I thought she'd side with me, but because I hoped maybe somewhere deep down, she was still my ally. I sent a carefully worded message, asking if we could talk. No accusations, just to clear the air. Her reply was polite but firm. "Mark, this family needs healing, but you must first acknowledge the hurt you caused." Reading that, I realized she wasn't seeing me. She was seeing the version of me Dad had painted. The villain who abandoned them, who refused to be part of the family. It hit me. Mom wasn't the neutral figure I'd always hoped she was. She had picked a side. Then there was Rachel. She never messaged me directly again, but my phone started receiving forwarded texts from her to other family members. Messages designed to make me look unreasonable. Complaints about me disrespecting tradition, hurting Mom, and shaming Dad in front of their friends. What struck me was the ease with which they weaponized my absence. At work, too, things got strange. A few colleagues I knew casually started avoiding me, and one even asked if everything was okay at home, hinting that she had heard some difficult things about my family drama. I suspect Dad's business partner had a hand in that. Dad was a man who liked to keep his business and family tightly linked, and when his version of me became the accepted one, the ripple effect spread. The worst was how my wife Jenna started noticing it too. She mentioned seeing a few of Dad's friends at her own workplace, making awkward comments about me behind my back. She was visibly upset but tried to keep her distance so as not to add fuel to the fire. One afternoon, I got a package at my door. Inside was a handwritten letter from Mom. It was filled with pleas for forgiveness, but also oddly laced with guilt trips. Lines like, "Your father and I are broken because of you, and we sacrificed everything for you, and this is how you repay us." It was clear the letter wasn't just meant to express sorrow. It was a calculated push to make me feel responsible for their marriage collapsing. Then there was a phone call from Rachel the next day. She sounded calm but cold. "Mark, you have to understand, you're tearing this family apart. Dad's marriage, Mom's health, it's all falling because you chose to walk away. Maybe if you cared more, none of this would be happening." Her voice had a cruel edge that stung deeper than I expected. It wasn't just anger, it was triumph. I started piecing things together and realized their broken marriage wasn't caused by me, but by decades of neglect, control, and manipulation, mostly by Dad. I learned from Linda, my cousin, that Dad had been emotionally abusive to Mom for years, isolating her from friends and controlling family finances. Mom's dependence on me emotionally was a side effect of that, and when I started pulling away, trying to live my own life on my own terms, Dad twisted it into me breaking their marriage. Rachel was Dad's biggest ally, often siding with him and enforcing his control by siding against me. This wasn't just family drama anymore. It was a toxic power struggle, and I was the outsider they wanted to blame. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. It was Dad. His voice was low and steady, like a threat disguised as calm. "Mark, you need to stop this nonsense. You're driving a wedge between us all. Your silence hurts more than any words. You owe me, your mother, Rachel, this family. You will come back, or you will regret what happens next." I could hear the coldness beneath the surface, the kind of coldness that doesn't break down in anger or sadness, but just waits patiently, like a predator. I didn't respond. That night, I realized I was dealing with more than just disappointment or family tension. I was facing a man who saw me as an enemy, a daughter who was complicit, and a mother trapped in a toxic cycle. The choice was mine, to submit to their narrative and their control, or to fight back and risk losing everything. For a while after Dad's ominous call, I sat in silence, staring at my phone, replaying his words. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. I knew this wasn't about reconciliation, it was about control. They wanted me back under their thumb, obedient and quiet. But I wasn't that person anymore. Something inside me snapped that night, not out of anger or spite, but a quiet resolve to stop being their scapegoat. I began quietly collecting everything I could: texts, emails, voicemails, anything that showed how they were twisting the truth to isolate me. I saved Rachel's messages where she called me selfish and heartless. I kept Mom's guilt-laden letters, even Dad's business partner's email. I also reached out to Linda again, my cousin, who had hinted at the deeper family issues. She was a cautious ally, but willing to help. "I've seen how they treat you," she said softly over coffee. "You're not crazy, Mark. They've been gaslighting you for years. You need to be smart about this." We talked at length about what kind of proof I could gather. Linda suggested I document everything moving forward, to have a record if this escalated further. I realized the family narrative had painted me as the villain because I stayed silent. If I wanted to fight back, I needed to reclaim my story. I started writing down everything. The years of feeling invisible next to Rachel, the way Dad favored her, the emotional toll of being Mom's emotional crutch, the way I was blamed for problems I didn't cause. It was painful, but also freeing. For once, I was telling my side without interruption. The next time my phone buzzed with a message from Mom or Rachel, I answered, but on my terms. I sent a message to Mom. "I understand you're hurt, but I will not engage in conversations that blame me for problems we all share. If you want to talk honestly, I'm here." To Rachel, I wrote, "Stop forwarding messages that misrepresent me. If you want a relationship, speak directly and honestly." I didn't expect these messages to be welcomed, but it was important for me to take back control of communication. One evening, Linda came over with something she had uncovered. "Mark, you need to see this," she said, handing me a folder. Inside were copies of some old emails and letters between Dad and his business partner. Things about how Dad was planning to protect his reputation at any cost, even if it meant destroying family members who disrupted the family image. There was also a letter from Dad to Mom from years ago, harsh and demanding, showing the emotional control he exerted. "I never wanted you to see this," Linda said quietly, "but it proves what I've been telling you. Your family's problems aren't your fault." Armed with this evidence and a clearer mind, I decided to push back where it hurt most: the family's reputation. I started by reaching out privately to some relatives and family friends who had been invited to the birthday dinner. I told them my side, shared some of the things I'd learned, and subtly hinted at how the narrative was one-sided. Surprisingly, some people responded with sympathy or admitted they had sensed tension but didn't know the full story. I didn't make accusations or start fights. I just spoke my truth quietly, steadily. Of course, my family caught wind of this. The next few days were filled with frantic messages and calls, this time more desperate and threatening. Dad sent a text saying, "You're destroying the family from the inside. Stop this before it's too late." Rachel escalated her messages to accusations of betrayal and disloyalty. Mom's messages were more confusing, a mix of begging and guilt-tripping. But I stayed firm. I wasn't going to be gaslit or intimidated anymore. The real turning point came when my phone rang late one night. It was Dad. His tone was colder than before. "Mark, you've crossed a line. You're not just breaking us, you're shaming us. If you continue this, there will be consequences." I could feel the threat in his words, but instead of fear, I felt clarity. He wasn't trying to reconcile. He was trying to scare me into silence. I replied calmly, "I'm only telling the truth. If that shames you, then maybe it's time for change." He hung up without a word. With Linda's help, I compiled a detailed account of everything: the emotional manipulation, the gaslighting, the favoritism, and the lies Dad spread to protect his reputation while sacrificing his family's truth. I didn't want to start a public drama or air dirty laundry for attention. Instead, I wrote a private letter and sent it to a few close relatives who had stayed neutral or distant, people who still cared about fairness and honesty. The reaction was surprising. Some were shocked. Others admitted they had suspected but never wanted to get involved. Slowly, cracks appeared in Dad's carefully constructed narrative. Over the next few weeks, the flood of calls, texts, and guilt-laden emails began to taper off, slowly at first, like a storm that doesn't quite know when to die. At first, I would still get the odd late-night voicemail from my mother, always trembling at the edge of emotion, asking if we could talk, just for a few minutes. Rachel would send abrupt messages full of thinly veiled accusations. "You could fix this if you wanted to," or You're doing this on purpose, admit it. Dad, ever the strategist, went quiet almost immediately. I suspect he was waiting, watching, expecting me to fold once the silence became unbearable. But I didn't. I started setting boundaries, real ones, not the kind you say in conversation and then apologize for the next day. I blocked their numbers. I removed them from social media. I deleted entire email threads without reading them. I even changed my phone number, not just to protect myself, but to give my nervous system a break from the constant jolt of dread every time my screen lit up. It wasn't easy. Even as I distanced myself, I carried this constant ache, like a thread wrapped too tight around my chest. There were nights I would lie awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about childhood holidays, birthdays, tiny moments that still glimmered with warmth in my memory. There were still photos in the back of drawers, gifts I hadn't thrown away, memories that weren't tainted yet. And that made it harder. There was guilt, a deep and often illogical guilt. The kind of guilt you feel when you leave a room quietly but are still blamed for slamming the door. The guilt of being the one who walks away, even when staying would mean losing yourself entirely. For a long time, I kept holding on to this small, quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, one day someone in the family would call and say, "We're sorry. We see it now." But that hope started to feel less like a dream and more like a leash. Because hope, when it's misplaced, becomes a chain. And when you keep waiting for someone who's never going to arrive, you only stand still. So I moved forward. Months later, I got a message out of the blue from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. We were never particularly close, but she had always been kind. Her message was short. "I just want to say I'm sorry you had to go through all this alone." I never knew the full story. That was it. No questions, no explanations. Just acknowledgement. And in that one line, I felt more validation than I ever had from my immediate family. That was the only olive branch I ever received. I didn't expect more. And truthfully, I didn't need more. My parents never reached out again. Rachel remained silent. Whether it was shame, anger, or a deeper refusal to admit any wrongdoing, I'll never know. But their silence, in a strange way, told me everything I needed to hear. Jenna and I have since built a life that actually feels like ours. It's quieter, simpler. But there's peace in it, real peace, not the kind you force during tense dinners or fake smiles. We've created new rituals, surrounded ourselves with people who don't ask us to shrink, and we've started to redefine what family means. I don't regret walking away. It cost me a lot, memories, connection, even a version of myself that I had to let go of. But I gained something much more important: clarity, safety, and the ability to look in the mirror without questioning who I am. And no, I don't forgive them. Not because I want to be bitter, but because they never took responsibility for what they did. They didn't ask for forgiveness. They didn't show remorse. Forgiveness isn't something I give away just to make others comfortable. It's something people earn by doing the work. They chose silence, blame, and control. That was their decision. And I've made mine. I've learned that family isn't always who shares your blood. Sometimes, it's the people who see you fully and love you anyway. It's the ones who don't rewrite your story for their own comfort. It's the ones who listen, even when the truth is hard to hear. This whole experience has changed how I see myself, what I accept from others, and what I believe I deserve. It taught me that love without respect is manipulation, that loyalty without honesty is just fear in disguise, and that walking away, when everything in you is screaming to stay for the sake of peace, is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. So that's where things stand. I'm free now, and I'm healing on my own terms. I have peace, space, and people who don't need me to break in order to feel whole. And that, more than anything, is what I needed all along. But I'll ask this honestly, because some days I still wonder. Am I the one in the wrong here? Was I too harsh? Should I have done more to fix things? Or was walking away the only real choice I had? I'd genuinely like to hear what you all think. Have you ever had to walk away from family or set boundaries with someone toxic? Drop your story in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe.